Welcome to The Politics of Money, the podcast of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy at the University of Ottawa. I'm Sahir Khan.
I'm Kevin Page.
On this podcast, we explore how public finance and politics intersect and the institutions that shape the choices that governments make.
We follow the money, but we also look at issues of accountability, democratic institutions, and our public policies. Are they working?
So in this issue, we're going to tackle three big things: sovereignty inside Canada, Canada's relationship with Europe, and the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, we have a fabulous guest, Mr. Dion, Stéphane Dion, somebody that I think many of us know, cabinet minister for three different prime ministers, former leader of the Liberal Party, a well-known ambassador, an ambassador who's been in Europe during an enormous flux, COVID, Brexit, and the war in Ukraine.
Let's get started.
Thank you, Mr. Dion. It's just such a great pleasure to welcome you. You back actually to the University of Ottawa. How does it feel like to, after just a stellar career that I actually watched as a public servant, your rise in popularity in the 90s, and the stories even behind how you were selected, the role that you played in the Clarity Act, the role that you played as, environmental minister, was, it seemed to be ahead of its time. And then, as a foreign affairs minister, and again, all those different cabinet positions crossing different prime ministers, and then, your time in Europe as an ambassador to different countries, Germany, France, Monaco. You were a special envoy for the European Union. Just all these incredible moments. What does it feel like when you look back? How does it feel?
Well, it has been an honor to work for my country, according to my values, within a team. In my case, it was the Liberal Party of Canada, where I was very comfortable. We did not achieve everything I wanted, but as you said, we did a lot. And now I don't want to stop. I want to find another way to help Canada, to help my country, to help the world in my modest role. And after 30 years in the federal institutions, like you, Mr. Page, I would like to find another way to support my country. I think it will be within the universities, looking like that. And I'm sure I will find many occasions to have a positive role because I need it. It's selfish. I cannot wake up the morning and asking myself what I will do today. Some people have this talent to invent by their own some activities, but I need to be part of a team. I need to be part of a purpose for common good.
Yeah, but you look terrific. Like you look healthy, and it's so good to hear that. Because we need you at these times as well. Because this incredible experience that you bring. And if I may, sir, today just cover maybe three topics. The first one, all of which you have these incredible experiences. But putting it in a current context, the first one obviously is Canada today, the unity pressures, the sovereignty pressures. The second one is really like building on, and the third one really building on your experience in the last 8 years, better part of a decade, in your experiences in Europe, trying to understand that evolving your relationship that Canada's going to have with Europe is happening, and then lastly the issue of Ukraine. And the challenges around reconstruction, if that's okay. So, again, starting this from the beginning with Canada, and again thinking about the roles that you played as a cabinet minister, but certainly as as intergovernmental affairs minister. We find ourselves. I think people are confused for the most part. They feel unnerved by these pressures on our sovereignty. And certainly from the United States, from President Trump, but also I think we're unnerved as well that we still have these internal pressures from two provinces, in particular, Alberta and Quebec. And I just sir, how do you see, how should we understand these sovereignty pressures externally and internally, and what does it mean for Canada today?
I think it's a bad habit that we have in Canada to put the very existence of our country on the table each time we have disagreements. The same disagreements are happening in other countries. It's creating a lot of tensions. The government may fall because of these polarizations, but they don't question the very existence of the country because of that. If you look in Alberta, I understand the frustration of many people that feel that they are contributing too much to other provinces as a rich province. I understand that you have these tensions about what should be good energy policy. At the time we want to decrease our footprint on the planet in order to stop the planet to be burning, including the forest of Alberta. These policies aren't that easy to figure. It's always difficult to find consensus. But again, there's only one country where some people will say we'll separate because of that, and it is in Canada. I don't think it's fair for our country. Canada is one of the most admired countries in the world. In fact, you have more than 1 billion people dreaming to become Canadian. So why some Canadians want to stop to be Canadians, that's bad, that's wrong. And I hope we'll find a way to solve all these arguments without threatening each other to erect international borders and to change fellow citizens in foreigners.
Yeah, sir. Again, if I could borrow on your, again, this incredible experience, but also your experience as a political scientist, like how do we understand what fuels these grievances? And are there similarities? Do you see similarities or more differences when we look at Alberta and Quebec when we think of internal pressures on our sovereignty?
Starting with Quebec, you have a separatist movement there since decades because you have a concentration of a population, the French Canadians, that are the clear majority in Quebec, but they are a minority in Canada and a tiny, tiny minority in North America. And Mexico is far away. So that means that North America, as we see that in Canada and Quebec, it's essentially an English-speaking continent. It's not a multilinguistic, multilingual continent like in Europe.
Yeah.
And so this French-speaking population of Quebec, majority in Quebec, minority in Canada, tiny minority in North America, you will always have political entrepreneurs that will say, you know, if we change the international border and we limit it to the territory of Quebec, all of a sudden we will become a majority. And we will feel much more comfortable, much more able to convince newcomers to learn French instead of English, because it will be clear that the language of the country is French. They will learn English as well, but French will be a kind of obligation for everyone. So that's the rationale why you have always a separatist movement in Quebec. In Alberta, it's a rich region. They are paying, they are helping other regions. That's a kind of tension, how much we should give.
Yes.
But I think the main explanation is the fact that in Canada, according to our constitution, natural resources are mainly a provincial jurisdiction. And this is almost unique in the world of federations. In the US and elsewhere, it's mainly a federal responsibility, federal jurisdiction. But in Canada, it's provincial. And this province, Alberta, has a lot of natural resources, oil and gas especially, and they are not willing to see Ottawa intervene too much in this sector because according to the Constitution, it's mostly provincial. And in the last years, because we need to decrease our footprint in greenhouse gas emissions, the federal government came with more aggressive policies to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions, especially in oil and gas extraction. And it created a tension with the government of Alberta. And some of Albertans concluded we would be better on our own without these interventions of the federal government that is quite hostile to our oil and gas industry in their mind. You have these same tensions elsewhere in the world about linguistic policies like in Quebec and energy policies like in Alberta. The context in Canada is very decentralized with strong provinces, and the sense that the step from a province to an independent state is not so big. I don't think it's true, but it is in the mind of
Yes,
the
yes.
people. I think it's fueling the sense that we may put the existence of the country on the table each time we have a disagreement.
Wow. Roll the dice. Pour une public pan-canadien, comment faut-il interpréter le Parti québécois, une tête dans les sondages, alors que depuis l'indépendance demeure minoritaire?
Le parti au pouvoir est devenu impopulaire, qui s'appelle la CAQ, la, euh, la coalition Avenir Québec, avec M. François Legault comme premier ministre. Ça fait longtemps qu'ils sont au gouvernement et presque toujours, quand un gouvernement est là depuis longtemps, il devient impopulaire. Alors, ils ont fait des erreurs aussi. Ils ont dépensé beaucoup d'argent avec peu de résultats sur le plan économique. Et donc, ils sont devenus impopulaires. Les libéraux ont des difficultés, ont même pas de chef en ce moment, mais viennent d'en avoir un nouveau, on verra. Et donc, pour beaucoup de gens, la solution de rechange, c'était le Parti québécois. Soit parce qu'ils sont indépendantistes, il y en a quand même
Hmm.
entre 30 et 35 c'est le tiers de la population qui est indépendantiste, soit parce qu'ils sont fatigués de la coalition Avenir Québec et voudraient un autre gouvernement. Alors, on est dans une situation où le Parti québécois pourrait gagner la prochaine élection avec moins de 30 des voix. Les libéraux et la CAQ remontent un peu. Il y a aussi un parti conservateur qui attire son nombre de voix. Il y a un parti d'extrême gauche, le Québec solidaire, qui va gagner, je sais pas, un peu moins de 10 des voix. Donc, si tout le monde prend un peu, mais pas assez pour gagner des sièges, le Parti québécois peut se faufiler et obtenir une majorité de sièges avec moins de 30 des voix. Est-ce qu'à ce moment-là, il irait de l'avant pour un référendum alors qu'il aurait été élu par un si petit nombre? Ça, je ne le sais pas. Le chef du Parti québécois l'a promis. Il y aura un référendum si vous nous élisez. Ça sera certainement un argument pour ne pas voter pour eux. Que le jour du vote, le Parti québécois fera moins bien que ça et ne sera pas élu. On verra.
Okay. So the leadership of the PQ doesn't automatically translate into a mandate for a referendum.
If they come with the commitment, as the leader of the Parti québécois said, that if you elect us, there will be a referendum. But now he moved. He said there will be a referendum, maybe close to the end of the mandate. I think his plan is to say to Quebecers, I know you're concerned because of Mr. Trump,
Yes.
and you think it's not the right moment to break up Canada when we need to be strong facing the attempt to integrate us in the U.S. by Mr. Trump. But the referendum actually will happen after the end of the mandate of President Trump. So don't worry. I think it's what he will say. But for that, he needs to be elected, and it's not done yet. As I said in French just before,
Yeah.
there's a possibility that he will be elected with less than 30% of the popular vote. If the other party split all the vote and the Parti québécois is able to become to take all these constituencies with less than 30% of the vote, it's quite possible in our electoral system. It's not an impossibility.
Okay. So again, if I may borrow, like on your thinking, your research as a political scientist, and again also a minister, a lot is being written about the rise of authoritarian type of leaders,
Yeah.
the rise of populism as a type of politic. Um, and like we see it, obviously, as we see it in the United States, Republicans, the Democrats. We see it in Europe as well. Um, I think many Canadians worry about that we're open to that kind of pressure as well. A growth of populism that's linked to identity. And maybe there's elements of there in Alberta and in Quebec as well for different reasons. How do you see federalism? Is federalism like an antidote to how does federalism help us deal with these populist kind of pressures?
I think federalism is a help. And the first question we need to ask to ourselves to convince us that federalism is not a magic antidote, but it's a counter power, a check and balance that we need. And the question I will ask to you, Mr. Page, can you imagine this world if the U.S. were not a federation?
No.
Imagine Mr. Trump is trying to weaken all these check and balances, but they are still existing. And one of them is the governors. Governors resisting, like the governor who doesn't want the bridge to be closed in Windsor and Detroit. He said no. And then the president is unclear if the president has the power to close this bridge, and it would be devastating for the economy of the U.S. and Canada. So because we have a federation in the U.S., the world is safer than otherwise. But I would say the same in Argentina, where you have regions of Argentina counterbalancing what the president of Argentina is trying to do. And tomorrow in Germany, you never know what may happen. And the extreme right will have a lot of difficulty to be strong in the lenders and in the lender and in the Bund, the federal institution at the same time. Even in Canada, when a region or a province is becoming a bit in a direction that may be worrying, the other partners of the federation are a factor that may balance that.
Yes.
So, no, it's good to be a federation in order to have stronger democracies and in order to have access to a larger market. If you had 10 egotistic republics at the north of the United States, imagine in which circumstances it would be now that the U.S. border is so difficult to do business with. So we have strong business between provinces. We are working to increase it. You know that very much. Mr.
Yes.
Page, you're an expert. You know how much we have barriers to decrease between our provinces, but at least we have this ability to have a very complex economy thanks to our federation. So no, federalism is a good thing. I'm not saying it's necessary in every country. Some countries are very tiny. They don't need a federation. But for Canada, you cannot imagine Canada without being a federation.
You will be known in history for what you did around the Clarity Act. I think my grandchildren, hopefully my great-grandchildren, will be reading about what happened in the 1990s and your work, these open letters, the passage of the Clarity Act. How should Canadians, what should they understand about the meaning of the Clarity Act in this current context with potential referendums?
First thing we need to realize is that almost all the states in the world are indivisible. They don't accept secession. That means separation of the country. They say it's against the Constitution. I include in that most democratic states. They say, no, don't ask me if you're a region Mississippi. It's not possible. Section 2 of the Constitution of Spain. So when Catalonia came with a referendum, and at the end of the referendum, they had a strong majority for secession, the government of Spain, they know you don't have this right. And nobody in the world said, no, Catalonia is now independent. Everybody said, well, it's the view of the government of Spain. What can we do? They say Catalonia is still a region of Spain, and it's what happened. In Canada, we say that differently. We say there's a way for a province, if the population of the province doesn't want to be Canadian anymore, there's a way to make this separation happen. But this way is not unilateral. It's not the decision alone of the premier of the province saying, look, I held a referendum, I have a yes vote, and now I am the president of an independent republic. No, it doesn't work this way. This way would be rejected by all democratic states of the world. So there is no unilateral right to secession. There is a right for a premier of a province or a government of a province to say, look, I have the proof that my population doesn't want to be Canadian anymore. they think they would be happier if they were not Canadian. It's very clear question, clear majority. Nobody can dispute that this population would like to leave Canada. According to this proof, then the premier of the province may welcome the other partners of the federation. That means the federal government and the other provincial governments at the constitutional table and negotiate an agreement of separation. Then the government of Canada would say to the world, I was one country, now we are two countries. I invite everybody to welcome the new country. So that's the model.
Yes.
It's very difficult to see how it may be done, but it's doable. The first condition is to have a clear support for separation. Why negotiate something if it's unclear if the population wants it? And the population needs to want it strongly because the negotiations will be difficult. To split the modern state is not an expert like you that I will learn how much it will be complex. Negotiations would be very tricky. How much money you need to transfer, how many public servants, institutions, borders, territories, minorities. It would be extremely difficult. But if there is a clear will of separation, I don't think Canadians will say, we'll keep this population in Canada against its will. We'll try to figure out what would be a fair deal for separation. But if it's what they want, what can we do? Canada will not be the same with a province willing to leave and stay in Canada against its will. So that's the way we would need to do it. I'm very optimistic that it will never happen. Because I think it's wonderful to be Canadian. It's wonderful to be Quebecer and Canadian, or Albertan and Canadian. Why choose? Why not embrace all your identities?
Yes. So I was a parliamentary budget officer, but before that, I was a long time public servant. And in a sense, I got to work on both sides of that proverbial red line. As a public servant supporting the executive, and a parliamentary budget officer supporting all of Parliament. I had an experience when I was at the Department of Finance, in the 80s, working actually with the Congressional Budget Office. I was spending some time thinking about what did it take to pass their budget in the United States in terms of the role that Congress had to play, and what was the limits of the executive power in the states. And as a public servant, I lived through majority and minority governments. I would say that for a long time, I had concerns, particularly when I became parliamentary budget officer, that we didn't have checks and balances in our Westminster system that were as strong as the ones that exist in the congressional system. You've witnessed, and we've all witnessed, what has gone on in terms of the destruction of institutional norms, particularly in the United States. How do you see our institutions in Canada, are they standing up? As a political scientist, as somebody that worked on these big issues, including issues of clarity, breaking up a country, are the institutions in Canada, are they durable? Are they strong enough to take on the kinds of potential threats that we see the institutions of the United States taking on, and in some cases, I think failing to do so? Do you see the checks and balances, strong checks and balances in the Canadian parliamentary system?
We have some. I think we have a political culture, a very democratic one. We are a very respectful country, much less violent than in the US, with more citizens than weapons, contrary to what you have in the US. We care about each other. We think if somebody is bad lucky with health, the community must come and support this person. So we have a federation. As I said just before, where when one government is doing in the direction that may be a bit odd, a bit dangerous, others may come with a counterpower that may be helpful. I think Canada is a strong country. I'm very concerned that we have separatism when in other countries you don't. And I think we would fail the world if we were sending the message that don't try to build your own Canada. We tried and we failed. What is Canada in terms of ideal? Canada is an ideal of ability to cooperate together and taking advantages of our differences. That's Canada. And to say to the world, it did not work, don't try, I think we would fail the world. You have so many identities in the world. You have peoples, almost, it depends of the computation, but you may think that you have more than 1,000 identities in the world of peoples or nations or whatever, and you have less than 200 countries.
Yes.
So the necessity to bring different populations together in confidence instead of in mistrust, that's the Canadian ideal. We need to make it a success.
Yes.
And it's the way we are considered. One of our difficulty today is that there are so many human beings coming at our border and asking to be a fellow citizen in Canada, to have the citizenship in Canada. And we say, it's too much, we cannot absorb all of this. It's a problem, I admit, but it's better than the opposite.
Yes.
If our population wanted to leave, how much it's helpful to be in Canada. No, it's a proof of our success that we are so popular in the world. Each time you ask two human beings where you would like to live if it was not your country, Canada is on or not far away of the podium.
Yes. I'd just like to draw on your experiences over the past decade in Europe, and so shift a little bit to international economic statecraft. And we've seen the incredible reaction to Prime Minister Carney's speech in Davos. And it's really it seems like every day I look at international news and somebody's picking up on it. So I just wanted to get a little bit of your take. But if I could, again, from a point of view of in French, après 8 ans en Europe, le moins bien de la politique européenne aujourd'hui.
Oh, je ne sais pas, ça dépend des Canadiens. Je ne sais pas s'ils suivent de très près la politique européenne. Je dirais que fondamentalement, les Européens et les Canadiens, on s'est toujours bien aimés les uns les autres. Depuis la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, l'Europe et le Canada, c'est une relation d'amour. Mais on n'a pas toujours eu le sentiment qu'on avait besoin les uns des autres. Le Canada se concentrant sur sa relation avec les États-Unis, je pense que ces dernières années, les Européens ont réalisé que non seulement mais qu'on a besoin. Now we know that we need each other. Si notre premier ministre nous envoie comme défi, nous les Canadiens, doubler nos exportations hors États-Unis, ça veut dire que les doubler en Europe. C'est une accélération énorme de la croissance de notre commerce en Europe. Ça ne se fera pas tout seul. Ça se fera par la volonté des Canadiens, en effet, de prendre à bras le corps ce continent extraordinaire qu'est l'Europe. Bien sûr, on pourrait dire la même chose de l'Asie ou de l'Afrique, mais moi, j'étais mandaté pour m'occuper de l'Europe et de faire en sorte que non seulement on ait des racines européennes, non seulement on a des relations avec l'Europe, mais on a un gros avenir, un avenir qu'il ne faut pas rater.
Sir, we've seen our Prime Minister Carney, travel the world, literally all the corners of the world. And this pressure for Canada to diversify trade that you alluded to, is Europe the next big step for Canada?
Yes, I think you mentioned, Mr. Page, the speech that Prime Minister Carney delivered in Davos a couple of weeks ago. There was a message for the world. And the message, I think, was we need to organize ourselves because the big powers are so difficult with us. At least if we may organize ourselves better, it would help to counterbalance. And it has been a home run, to take a terminology of the national sport of the United States, because human beings were willing to hear that, to hear enough of Mr. Trump and the way he's behaving. His neighbor of the North is telling that. People were very, very, very thankful that our Prime Minister said this thing. But I think there was a message for Canadians as well in this speech. And it's the message you mentioned yourself. It is, can we be serious when we say we want to diversify? Because it's not new. Diversification is a target that Canadians have since decades, since Pierre Trudeau, since the 60s and the 70s, and Pearson. We always said that we want to diversify. But, well, the trade with the U.S. is still 75% of our trade. They are dependent. We are completely dependent to the U.S. for our security. And it will not change. We always need to be in strong relationship with the United States. The relationship we have now is not healthy and it's not normal. We need to come to something more normal. But we need also to take our lesson and to understand that it would be good to be not completely independent, but less dependent to the U.S.
Yes.
And for that, our Prime Minister said, can we double our trade outside the U.S.? So to double with Europe, with the Indo-Pacific, and so on. It's doable, but it will be a lot of work
Yes.
For our business, because it's something we need to keep in mind that countries usually trade with their neighbors first. If you look at the U.S. themselves, you know that they export more to Canada than to China, to Japan, to the UK, and to France together. That France itself trade as much with the big U.S. than the small Belgium, because Belgium is their neighbor. So countries trade with their neighbors, and to trade more than that is always a bit demanding. So for our business, they are accustomed to find a client, a partner, the other side of the border in North America. If you tell them, oh, but you have a market that you may discover in France or in Germany or Belgium or in the Netherlands, and it will help you for that. We are well equipped. We have trade commissioners willing to work with you. You need to take their hand to bring them, to introduce them to new clients or new partners. Otherwise, it will not happen. I think it's the Davos speech to say, Canadians, be serious this time. We need to make progress in diversification of our support, both in geostrategy and economics.
In your time in Europe over the past 8 years, as a special envoy to the European Union, as an ambassador to Germany, to France, to Monaco, and seeing what is going on in terms of those connectivity between trade commissioners and on business opportunities in Europe. Do we have that type of social infrastructure? Is it there?
We have a lot of talents, people that are incredible heroes that Canadians will never know that they are existing. Some are Canadians, some are Europeans. When I was in Berlin, I was so impressed by the trade commissioners we had there, and some are there working since decades for Canada. Nobody will know their name.
Okay.
I saw the same in France and beyond the EU, because I was a special envoy for the whole Europe. You have 27 countries in the European Union, but you have other countries elsewhere, and you have a lot of potential for us in these countries. And we have trade commissioners ready to work hard, and diplomats in general, because trade is not only about trade narrowly defined. Trade is about diplomacy, opening doors. Trade is about culture. In Europe, if you want to succeed, you need to show that you have talents, artists, creators.
Yes.
If you are able to come with a beautiful piece of music, or theater, or painting, Europeans will think, oh, Canadians are good. And it's giving you kind of a branding that you need, and we neglect that. So it's not only narrowly defined trade. Do we have enough? I don't think so. And I understand that because we are in the deficit, and it's not for you, Mr. Page, that I will learn to you what is a deficit. It's your expertise. The government is trying to cut the bureaucracy, but there is not a lot to cut in our embassies.
Yes.
You will not save a lot of money in cutting our embassies. I think maybe more in Ottawa. If you look the ratio of Global Affairs Canada, number of employees in Ottawa and in the world, it's about 50-50. But our competitors and friends in France, in the UK, Germany, 30s, 70, 30 in the capital and
Yes, I
70 in the
understand.
world. So I would suggest maybe to cut more here in Ottawa than in the world. I think it's what they are trying to do,
Yeah.
Mr. Morrison, the Deputy Minister, and Minister Anand. And I think they are right. It's what you need to do. If you have to cut, if you may avoid cuts, that's good. But since we need to cut and to make sacrifices, protect the people on the ground. Canadians are not aware of it, that the people they have around the world are so beneficial for themselves. If you have a trouble somewhere in the world, you need to know that there
Yes.
is an embassy that will rescue you, helping you to find a new passport, to bring you back in Canada if you are ill. These people are working hard for you, but they need to exist. They
Yes.
need to be around.
From outsiders like myself, we've seen a lot of political volatility, economic volatility, I think because of Brexit. How do you see our relationship like with the UK evolving over the next number of years?
It's very sad that the UK did Brexit. I think there is a regret effect. You have seen polls in the UK showing that they think it was a bad decision for them. I think they were wonderful Europeans. They thought they were not good as Europeans, the UK, but no, they were very good. And we Canadians were willing to work with the UK in order to influence the EU. So we lost our best ally in the EU when the UK left, but it is done. And I don't know if they will revisit this decision one day, but don't count on it for the foreseeable future. So it's impossible for Canada to not have strong relationship with the UK. We are so close to them. And I think under the circumstances, we did as good as it was possible to do. We have difficulty to negotiate a free trade agreement with the UK because all our quotas have been given to the EU, with the UK in the EU. And now the UK would like to have something for themselves. And we say, no, we already gave it to the EU. And ask to the EU your share of the Canadian quotas, but don't ask quotas of cheese and things like that. But don't ask us to increase what we have asked to our own people to deliver for the EU of 28. Now they are 27, but it's for the UK to take. You see what I mean?
Yes.
So that's a difficulty we have with them. I think it will be solved one day. But look, the UK is now part of the trade agreement with the Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific Treaty. Canada welcomed that, and we are trying to convince the EU to do the same. So if it works, and John Hannaford is working on it very strongly, if it works, and it was an idea I had when I was a Minister of Foreign Affairs a long time ago, but it was ahead of its time, I guess. But now we are doing our best, Canada, to bridge the EU, the UK, and the Indo-Pacific in the same treaty of trade, where you will not have the US, they don't want to be part of it, and China is not part of it. So when Prime Minister Carney spoke about middle powers, that's I think the most concrete project we may think about what that means. A trade agreement between all the middle powers of Indo-Pacific and Europe and Canada and other South American countries like Argentina and Brazil. So that would be fantastic, but it's a lot of work to reconcile the views of the EU and the views of the Indo-Pacific. Maybe we'll have different steps, but not a clear free trade agreement.
Okay.
But some steps may be done, I think, if we work hard.
Sir, I'd just like to close with some discussion on Ukraine. I think the war in Ukraine has really unnerved a lot of people across the world. Actually, my grandparents came from the Ukraine on my mom's side, and I've had the opportunity to be there, visit a couple of times over the past decade or so after the war started in 2014. But I wanted to get your takes as an ambassador, as a special envoy, and Canadians. There's a big Ukrainian contingent of Canadians. We've seen Prime Minister Trudeau and Prime Minister Carney talk about providing support, particularly for Ukraine defense. How is it being taken? Like, how do Europeans perceive Canada's role in the Ukraine, effort, the reconstruction effort in terms of the defense of the Ukraine?
Construction will come, and hopefully we'll find all the support Ukraine will need at that time. But for now, it's not reconstruction, survival. You have people incredibly courageous since more than 4 years. It will be longer than the Second World War pretty soon. They are at war, and for no valid reason. It's the war of one man. You may discuss, did NATO made all the right decisions up to February 24, 2022. But after that, it's clearly the war of one man, because the Chancellor of Germany and the President of France came one after the other one in the Kremlin, and said to President Putin in the eyes, don't do a war because of that. Ukraine will not go in NATO. There's no reason to attack Ukraine. Ukraine is not a threat for you. It's not true. There is a genocide in Ukraine against people of Russian language. It's completely a fallacy. So after this very clear talks with these two leaders of France and Germany, I think a president of Russia that would have been more respectful of human life and less despotic would have said, okay, I'm still concerned about what NATO you're doing. We have been invaded in our history, Russia, always through Ukraine or Poland. Once you're in Ukraine, you're very close to Moscow. I'm very concerned by that. But I hear what you're saying, and even though I'm not completely comfortable, I will not start a war because of that. I think it's a reasonable reaction, but not with Putin. Came with a war. I think it's because he thought in a couple of days or weeks, maybe months, he would be in Kyiv. And for more than 4 years after, and so much destruction, lives that has been destroyed completely, and it's so awful. It's awful for Ukrainians, it's awful for Russians, it's awful for the world.
Yes.
Because look what is happening now. We will invest 5% of our GDP in protecting ourselves against human beings. So human beings protecting themselves against human beings, now they will invest much more in it than to reconcile their relationship with the planet.
Yes.
That's a complete disaster for humankind. If you have someone from another planet looking at us, they must ask themselves what kind of animals they are. But it's the way it is, and Prime Minister Carney has no choice. He needs indeed to do his part to make sure that Canada will be there for Ukraine, not to help Ukraine to solve its social or environmental problems, but only to survive, and to spend in NATO and to spend in to reorient our industry toward weapons to kill people.
Yeah,
it's a tragedy for the world, but it's a moral obligation to do that under the circumstances.
Sir, do you, as you follow the peace process or the conversations, is tangible progress being made in those peace talks? When we see Russians and Americans, no, not yet. No interest.
No. I think President of Ukraine and the President of Russia, they don't want to be the one that will say to Trump, I stop the negotiations. So they pretend to negotiate in order to not displease Mr. Trump. But what can they negotiate? Mr. Zelensky cannot accept to give to Putin territories that he did not conquer already. He cannot accept that the territories that Putin handled today will be recognized as Russian. He may accept to have a pause or to have the situation you have in Korea, where they agree to disagree, and you have a border, and You have the two armies looking at each other, but not fighting to each other. But to recognize that all these parts of Donbass would become Russian and internationally recognized as Russian, he cannot. So there is very little room for him to negotiate. Now Putin, will he accept that Mr. Zelensky will be protected by NATO troops, even though it's not NATO itself, but countries of NATO,
Yes.
France, UK, Canada, having boots on the ground? He would be then in a worse situation than he was in 2022.
Yes.
Already because of his stupidity. He has now the two serious countries, part of NATO on this north, close to St. Petersburg, because he created this situation. You would have asked to Sweden and Finland, do you think you will be part of NATO one day? They would have said, no, it's not what we want to do. Now, unanimously almost, they are part of NATO, thanks to the stupidity of Putin. So he cannot, in addition to it, accept to have boots on the ground in Ukraine. But for Zelensky to accept a peace agreement without having any security,
Yes.
would be impossible politically in Ukraine.
And
So I think both of them were pretending to negotiate, but in fact not in a situation to compromise to each other's.
Understood. You've always come across to me as a man that has hope, that and that is also somebody willing to put in the energy and the effort to make things better. Can you envision a role for Canada after the war of the Russia war in Ukraine, an effort to rebuild Ukraine, reconstruction?
Of course, Mr. Page, because outside Ukraine and Russia, it is in Canada where you have the biggest number of human beings with Ukrainian origin. So for us, it's very important that Ukraine will find a way to be a happy country one day and a safe one. And all these people that want to come back to Ukraine will be able to do it safely. That's very important for Canada. We will do our share, I'm sure. But in the meantime, our responsibility is to be backing Ukraine and to convince the U.S. to continue to do so. Why so many leaders in Europe and Canada have been trying to convince President Trump to continue to support Ukraine is because we need them.
Yes.
We need them for the logistics. There is no satellite capacity or whatever without the U.S. Yes, Europe and Canada, we are trying to improve our ability to support Ukraine, but we need the U.S. Ukraine needs the U.S. And the fact that you have a president of the United States that seems to be more sympathetic with Putin than with democratic leaders is very sad.
But on that hopeful note, that we are going to be there for Ukraine when this is over. I want to thank you sincerely, for taking the time, sharing your views. I know people are going to be reaching out. I know the phone is going to be ringing for you, but just an enormous thank you. And also as a former public servant, then I could say that to work with people like yourself with your sort of energy, your courage, your integrity was amazing. It made it worthwhile for me. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Page, and thank you to mention the team, because what you have said about my person is because I've been supported by so talented people through my involvement for the common good, and will mention especially the ones I have seen abroad. Them and their family, their families, to be in Europe. I'm sure it's the same in other continent, but I have seen that in Europe, working for their country because they believe in it. I think it's an inspiration for me to continue to work hard. Kenyans must realize, as we speak, many of our fellow citizens are around the world working for us, and they are great.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your inspiration.
Thank you.
Kevin, that conversation covered a lot of ground, from national unity to Europe to Ukraine.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, Sahir. I thought it explained that sovereignty isn't just about borders, that it's about values and institutions.
So our sincere to Stéphane Dion for joining us, and for all of you for joining us on the IFSD podcast, The Politics of Money.